Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at the best standard best of one decks, the top decks that can help you get Mythic Rank in December's season. So we just had the ladder reset yesterday. We're going to take a look at what decks are over the last week have been doing the best on the MTG Arena ladder. And as always, we get the data from Untapped.gg, what you see on the screen, companion tool that tracks your win rates, deck collections, whole bunch of cool stats. Link for Untapped is in the video description. I'll timestamp and paste all these deck lists, and you can copy paste everything. All the details will be in the video description. For folks playing decks with Monstrous Rage in it, there's been a number of questions that came out. This deck showing up as illegal for Mono Red, Boros, whatever it may be. Since they banned Monstrous Rage and Alchemy, it's been this weird bug on the Arena client. So import the deck, take out Monstrous Rage, then manually add them in. And then it should work that way there. So just in case folks were asking. So we're going to dive into the stats in just a second, but I want to announce a charity drive that I started last year and we'll be doing every December. So basically every penny that I make off YouTube views, like revenue, anything like that for the month of December, I'm donating 100% of the proceeds that I make off YouTube videos to a local Toronto-based food bank. So I like to support the community. It is the holiday season, the season of giving. So this is my way to give back to my local community. So every cent that I make off YouTube will be donated. We'll add a tracker with a goal amount. Last year we did just a shade under 400. I think it was like 360 or 370. This year I'm going to be doing a little bit more optimistic. I want to try to do $800 that we're donating. So if you can, throw on some YouTube of my videos, have them running in the background. It'll help with generating more revenue that we can then donate together as a kind of nice holiday gift to those more needy. So that'll be something I'll be mentioning in a couple videos. So just something a little bit different. It's the first of the month. I'll put out a video explaining and we'll go from there. But let's jump into the details themselves, folks. So with the ladder reset, all the Mythic players have dropped down to Platinum. So we're going to look Platinum to Mythic to kind of give a distribution of where folks are at with games, and then we'll share the deck list themselves. So Mono Black Midrange, like the Demon decks, have kind of overtaken the most played decks as just a shade under 15%. We have Mono Red Aggro at 11, Boros Auras at 11. What might happen here, and like what we're seeing a little bit more this week, is Boros Prowess kind of getting lumped in with the Boros Auras. So the existing Boros Auras decks are good. We're going to look at a Boros Prowess version today. If you're interested in Boros Auras, you can take a look at any of the past videos or at my Aether Hub. There'll be some deck lists there. Orzhov Bats, Lifegain. Lifegain's actually been very popular in the last little bit, so we'll look at a couple lists there. When you are shifting to Platinum, you're going to get some folks that are... Lifegain's a little bit more of a new player-friendly kind of deck. The discard decks, always kind of popular, never really putting up much win rates. Compared to the Demon versions, Oculus has been still played relatively high, but is a little bit on a downturn in terms of win rates, both best of 1 and best of 3 the last little bit. Golgari Mid, and then 5-color Reanimator wrapping it up. So what you'll likely see, just kind of trend lines historically, with the start of a new season, Mono Red gamers come out, aggro gamers, and then counters to aggro decks usually kind of spur up as folks try to make that initial push to Mythic. So we are going to get started today. 480,000 games played in the last week. So this is going to cover the end of the season into the beginning of the week. And we're going to start off, the highest win rate deck is Mono Black Demons. So I was actually playing this deck yesterday to kind of get a feel for it. And with a slight revision that I'll mention, it's strong. It can definitely beat the aggro decks. You do run into some clunky draws at times. The problem that I was encountering with this is the wrong half situation, where I actually ran into CGB on the ladder. I had a handful of cut downs that would have been great against an aggro deck, and then I ran into mono white control, and I'm using like removal for like a quarter of a carrot cake, and it just didn't make much sense. So that's one of the things you just want to be a little bit mindful of. So the big thing here, you have the Demon package. You have the combo of Unstoppable Slasher, Bloodletter of Aclazotz that can one-shot your opponent. You have Unholy Annex as a card draw engine and a win con, and then you have Archfiend Adross. The one thing you want to do with your Mana Blaze is switch these to Soulstone Sanctuary. The reason being, it's basically like Mutavault, where it can become a demon, and it gives you kind of that value in that sense. So then you get the gain and drain off that as well. So that's one thing you might want to try out. You could also just, if you don't have them, I would play just more Myrex over the Mishra's Foundry. Don't play Mishra's Foundry. This card's not good. It doesn't attack in well. It's just very susceptible. It turns on your opponent's cut downs. So that's one thing to kind of consider. The deck itself, the other change I made, I didn't really like Shieldred's Edict because I found a lot of times against mono red or stuff like that, they'd have like the Lizard on 1 and then an impactful 2-drop. I wanted to kill the 2-drop, but the 1-drop kind of insulated it. But I just went up one more Throat and one more Anoint. Cut downs, Duress was actually pretty solid. It picks off a lot of mono red spells, whether it be auras, pump effects, stuff like that. The protection effects out of the aura deck could be reasonable. Bat's been okay. Against mono red, it's not great, just because most of the things kill it, but it can kind of throw them off curve, disrupt them a bit, and then it's good against like the mid-rangey decks. Liliana was fine. The slashers were pretty good. Archfiend closed out the game really quick, and then Unholy Annex was a nice engine card. You have to be a little bit mindful, like against mono red, you're not always playing this on curve, so you usually got to hold it for like later turns. You then go to mono red aggro, 66%. So this is a fairly stock list. We are seeing some copies of Obliterating Bolt in the main. So this one here is trimming on 1 Witch Stalker and 1 Lightning Strike in lieu of 2 Obliterating Bolts. So the bolts does provide some scalable damage. It can deal with Preachers and stuff like that in the kind of 4 toughness range. It does turn off the ability to have instant speed interaction, which can be a little bit problematic in the mirror. The Screaming Nemesis continues to be kind of the mirror breaker in these aggro decks, just kind of stonewalling a lot of it. But this deck's very strong in terms of just having a very linear, proactive game plan. You are a little bit susceptible to removal, but this version does provide a little bit more reach, especially if you flood. This just scaling up to 4 damage is strong. Again, if you're importing this and crafting it, take out the Monstrous Rage and then put everything else in the deck, and then add the Monstrous Rage in manually. It should work in that case there. It's an Arena client thing. It's nothing with the deck imports. It doesn't matter if you do it straight from my export, on tap, like any other site. Like, it doesn't matter. People were importing from the deck list that I was playing, and it was still messed up. This is on the Arena side. So Boros Burn is kind of the deck that was picking up this week. Similar elements. We have the Screaming Nemesis, the Emberheart Challenger, Manifold Mouse kind of package with like your 1-drops. This version's on Bolt Wave, so 1-drop that this version has more power to go face, but less to interact with your opponent's creatures. And then you have Boros Charm as well as Shelter by Ghosts. Shelter can be very strong, dealing with threat. The lifelink with the double strike can be really big with like the mouse package. And then Screaming Nemesis, obviously very strong. You can, with this deck, there's fewer ways in this version, but usually the kind of trick is like you burst lightning your Screaming Nemesis, redirect the damage to your opponent, Witch Stalker Frenzy your Nemesis to deal 5 damage. You kind of lose out on those elements, but you have some protection effects even with Boros Charm. Most of the time you're dealing 4 damage, but Indestructible could be reasonable, Double Strike, all those kind of elements. Restless Biovac, there's no Foundry or Verge, so you're a little bit worse in that respect. Mono White Control. So I think this is one of the better decks this early on to kind of rank up with. The reason being, you're very flexible in terms of a lot of removal for the aggressive decks. So Lay Down Arms, Get Lost, Soul Partition. Carrot Cake can just stonewall them for a bit, gain you a bunch of life. You have Temporary Lockdown. And then you have the draw engine here of like Caretaker's Talent, Enduring Innocence, just to kind of grind your opponent out. This provides a lot of utility, especially against like the mid-range decks where, like in that example, I had at one point 3 of the Annex out, but CGB was drawing 2 additional cards per turn cycle with Caretaker's Talents. One's on my turn, one on his turn, one on my turn. So it was hard for me to kind of grind him out. Even though I was like drawing cards, he was able to find removal over the course, like between Get Lost, Soul Partition, like more flexible removal, where I had no way to interact with his enchantments. This one does. Elspeth provides sustained card advantage. Life gain, there's a lot more ways to gain life. And then the deck can quickly pivot and close out the game, whether it be a hard cast Virtue of Loyalty or just like mode 4 of Caretaker's Talent. Some of them will have the Surveil lands as just ways to kind of filter your draw. The Surveil lands matter more in best of 3, where the decks often will splash blue or black for Planeswalkers. So blue being for Jace, black being for Kaya and Liliana Dreadhorde General. You could just use the Citadel, Fountain Port kind of engine in these lists. Then we go to Mono White Lifegain, 63%. So I will say this is probably like higher at Platinum rank and will probably do slightly worse at the higher ranks. So keep that in mind. But if you're running into a lot of red, it could be reasonable. These decks, you think life gain, you're going to immediately take down mono red. That's not necessarily the case because it does require some setup to get going. And mono red could deal huge chunks of damage with like Monstrous Rage, double strike effects. It's not like they're nickel and diming. It's obviously better against like the burn versions. Where they're maybe not pushing, like, you know, if you could gain 3 life, that basically nullifies a card out of their hand. Sorry, my dog's protecting the front door. But you have Authority, which could be reasonable against the haste threats. Case of the New Feast makes any creature coming into play gain you some life. You got Healer Hawk in here. This version's on 3 Skrelves, which probably is a little too slow for the format. You might just want more like the Healer Hawks, just since it could start gaining the life. The thought here is you protect your Johnny's Pridemate or Essence Channeler, which is kind of your life gain engines, but largely a 1-drop that doesn't block on your turn might be a little too slow. Sheltered by Ghost, very strong. You have the card draw engine of Enduring Innocence, 1 copy of Linden, which was in the Foundation's additional stuff. So if you had it from like the core set, you probably already have one of these. So whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain a life. And then you have Exemplar of Light, which can draw cards. Steel Seraph is really a 3-drop in this deck that could give evasion and lifelink. Then you have some copies of Dollmaker's Shop that can make some tokens. In the mana base here, you could probably have like either a Myrex or a Fountain Port, maybe 1 or 2 copies, just to provide some utility. It's a little tough because you do have some like strict 3 white drops, but I think you can get away with playing at least like 1 or 2 utility lines. Just 21 Mountains feels kind of, or Plains feels kind of bad. We then go to Zur Overlords, so it's 59%. This deck's looking to play out the Overlord cycle. You have blue, green, and white. Most notably, the green one will help you set up domain, help you ramp. This one makes you tokens. And then with Zur, you're able to animate them. So you cast them for impending. The best curve is kind of Overlord on, so Beanstalk on 2, Overlord on 3, draw a card. Turn 4, Zur with the 5th mana, animate Overlord, attack for 6 lifelink, get another land, which is really, really strong. You have Leyline Binding you can animate, but otherwise, this version here, Get Lost as removal, Split Up as sweeper, Scroll Shift is another way you can blink your impending creatures. Then you're just kind of playing Domain. You do have to watch out because you are playing a lot of tap lands. This is a fairly expensive deck to craft-wise, just in terms of rares and mythics, but this kind of strategy, to some extent, you'll see like Enigmatic in Pioneer or Explorer, which are other decks that kind of get played out with this shell. You then go to Orzhov Bats. This is kind of Orzhov Lifegain combo. This one's at 59%. So this one here is about gain and drain. So you have things like Starscape Cleric. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. So what you're trying to do with this deck, have a bunch of creatures that gain life. So Hinterland Sanctifier, Soul Warden style effects, Snarling Gorehound puts stuff in the graveyard. Amalia lets you explore, but it lets you also get some value here in terms of just card advantage. It could also blow up your board. Ilias' Core is another kind of gain and drain Blood Artist effect. The duo, so you put a bunch of cards into play, gain a bunch of life, drain them out, trade your creatures off, then you can reanimate with Dewdrop Cure, or Raise the Past to return all creatures with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. So it's mass reanimation, a whole bunch of things come in at the same time, then you drain out your opponent. This one here, a little bit budget version in the sense that the mana base is a little bit basic. You could play the Surveil lands, you could play like Fountain Port, stuff like that. You also probably want Bartolome if you want this, because the whole point is kind of the gain it during the sacrifice effect. That can trigger Ilias Acor as well to get cards back into your graveyard. So a little bit more of a budgety one. I would say, again, this deck and the mono white deck, good enough for platinum. Higher than that, it's probably not the best. Just so kind of keep that in mind. Golgari Midrange is a very strong deck, 58%. Typically a deck that does better in best of 3 based on its flexibility. These decks can vary in the number of creatures that they play. This one's a little bit more mid-rangey, but you'll see like Annoyance, Go for the Throats, Cut Downs, Llanowar Elf can help you get turn 2 Glissa, which is very strong. Throwbacks main, Sentinels main, just flexible cards, provide different card advantage. This is on the Archfiend package, no Shelly, with the Unholy Annex, and then 2 Vivian Reeds here. Card advantage, blows up artifacts, enchantments, or creatures with flying. But all around like utility planeswalker. The Mosswood Dread Knight could be card advantage, trades a little early. You have Fountain Ports, Restless Cottage. Again, this is another deck that has played in best of 3 some numbers of Soulstone Sanctuary as another way to have a creature for the Unholy Annex. And I would say it's got the best of the Restless cycles in terms of the creature lands within the deck. So this one, when I was opening it up the other way, it was giving me issues, but this is a wild, weird one. So 290 games, 58%. So this is a deck that you're like, but how does it win? You got Storm Chaser's Talent in here. That's one way to win. So you have kind of the combo of bouncing your own stuff and your opponent's stuff. This town ain't big enough, triggers up the Beanstalk, Overlord. So you're ramping with this deck. You're setting up Domain. You're countering stuff, just slowing the games down. Lunar Insight draws you a card for each different mana value amongst permanents you control. So Authority's a permanent, Storm Chaser's Talent's a permanent, Up the Beanstalk's a permanent, Leyline Binding, whatever it may be. Then you have Invasion of Arcavios. So this is a way to search outside of your library for a card, and you could put it into your hand. So from there, what you're able to do is like shuffle your hand back with Step Between Worlds. You can use a big sweeper in White Swan's Twilight. That's also your win condition. You have Titania's Command that you can make bears, and then you can keep bringing it back with Storm Chaser's Talent kind of effect. You have Outrageous Robbery to just kind of steal a bunch of their stuff. Doppelgang. The Season of Weaving can kind of return everything to hands and reset your kind of combo. So a lot of different ways to win once you get this out, but ramp and big mana things, flashy kind of spells. Simic Terror was a deck that was very popular last week between best of 1 and best of 3, 57%. So another deck that's kind of taking advantage of the Beanstalk with alternative casting costs. So this town ain't big enough, costs 2, but triggers Beans. Eddie Mark Crab can cost 2 based on instants and sorceries in your graveyard, which this deck plays a lot of 1 mana ones. Similar with Tolarian Terror, 1 mana, 5/5 ward 2. That draws you a card is a pretty good rate. You have the talents. You have only 17 lands because you're playing things like Analyze the Pollen, Bushwhack to help you find lands, Seed of Hope, and Cash Grab mill you over while helping you find lands. Then you have Into the Floodmaw and Unsummon as ways to bounce creatures. Notably, Unsummon can target your own creatures, so you can bounce these back to reset them to get another card draw. Then go to Azorius Control, 57%. So this is very light on win cons. Let's answer everything your opponent's doing. Recently reprinted Day of Judgment, but just killing everything. You have Get Lost, Not on My Watch, Soul Partition, Silver Scrutiny could draw you cards, Union of the Third Path to gain some life, Lockdown as a sweeper effect with Sunfall. Your win conditions in this deck are Jace milling out your opponent, as well as Restless Anchorage and Fountain Port to make you tokens. So very much slow games for this one here. 8.5 minutes for a best of 1 deck. We have the Oculus deck at 56%. This one here has got Into the Floodmaw, Forest Dispersal. I would say like this deck needs more, like this configuration needs more 1 mana interaction. The problem is like you're playing so many things on 2 to set up, but mono red is probably going to kind of run you down. The tempo elements are pretty strong, just to bounce. Like your late game is going to be stronger than mono red between Hadijin and Oculus. But if you're spending 3-4 turns of just setup, you're probably going to be dead. But the core of this deck is kind of draw discarding, milling yourself over Oculus and Haudijin, and then bringing them back with Helping Hand or Recommission. So you kind of cheat their casting cost and get some value there. And then the last is 5-color Reanimator, which is really Rakdos Reanimator, 5-color, because you play Atraxa. This deck here is all about drawing and discarding, Bitter Reunion. You could discard stuff to Bitter Triumph, Fear of Missing Out, and then you bring back creatures with Zombify, Rakdos joins up, or Cruelty of Gix, and then you have big hitters in Valgavoth, Atraxa, and Itali. You also have Pull here that you could bring 2 creatures back, give them haste. They get sacrificed at your end step, so get the value and then just like swing for 16 kind of effect, which is pretty sweet. So if you like your big Reanimator decks, this is maybe something to try out as well. So for the week, let me know what you've been playing, what you've been enjoying, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.